The morning started like any other morning in Seoul. The sun climbed over the tall buildings, casting long shadows across the busy streets. People rushed to work, students walked to school, and the city hummed with its usual energy. In a small playground near Gangnam, 7-year-old Dae-jung played on the swings, his laughter mixing with the sounds of other children. His mother, Hana, sat in a cafe across the street. She sipped her coffee and watched him through the large window. The warm cup felt good in her hands. She smiled as Dae-jung ran from the swings to the slide, his small legs pumping with excitement. He wore his favorite blue jacket, the one with the rocket ship on the back. He loved space. He loved stars. He asked her every night to tell him stories about astronauts and distant planets. Hana checked her watch. 10 more minutes, then they would go home for lunch. She had promised to make his favorite meal, kimchi fried rice with extra egg. Simple things. Normal things. The kind of day that parents treasure without knowing why, without understanding how precious ordinary moments can be. Then the sky changed. It happened fast. A shadow fell over the playground, dark and heavy. Hana looked up and her coffee cup slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. Above the playground, a massive ship appeared from nowhere. It was not like anything humans had built. The metal was black and smooth, covered in strange symbols that seemed to glow with a cold blue light. The ship made no sound, which somehow made it more terrifying. Hana was already running. She burst through the cafe door and sprinted toward the playground. Her training kicked in. The years she had spent in special forces, the missions she never talked about, the skills she thought she would never need again. But she was too far away, too slow, too late. A beam of light shot down from the ship. It surrounded Dae-jung in a circle of white brightness. He looked up, confused and scared. His mouth opened in a scream that Hana could not hear over the rush of blood in her ears. Other children scattered, running to their parents. But Dae-jung could not move. The light held him frozen. Hana was 50 meters away when Dae-jung began to rise. The light pulled him up slowly, gently like he weighed nothing. His arms reached down toward her. She could see his face, twisted in fear and confusion. She ran faster, her lungs burning, her legs screaming. 40 meters, 30, 20. The ship started to climb. Dae-jung disappeared into an opening in the bottom of the craft. The light vanished. The opening closed. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the ship shot upward into the sky. In seconds, it was gone. The clouds closed behind it like nothing had happened. Hana stood in the empty playground, staring at the sky. Her chest heaved. Her hands shook. Around her, other parents gathered their children close, whispering prayers and holding them tight. But Hana's arms were empty. Her son was gone. The police came. Then the military. Then men in dark suits who said they were from a special government division. They asked Hana questions she could not answer. They told her to stay calm. They said they were handling it. She wanted to scream at them, to shake them, to make them understand. But she stayed quiet. She listened. She learned this was not the first time. The aliens, they called themselves the Vral, had made contact with Earth 3 weeks ago. The meeting had been peaceful. The Vral said they came in friendship. They offered technology, knowledge, a place in the galactic community. Earth's leaders were excited, hopeful. They saw opportunity. What they did not see was the trap. The Vral had done this before. Many times before. To hundreds of worlds across thousands of years. Their method was simple and brutal. They found new species and studied them. Then they took children, not many, just enough. They said it was an exchange program, a cultural sharing, a way for young minds to learn about the galaxy. But it was not an exchange. It was a weapon. That night, Hana sat in a government auditorium with 200 other parents. Their faces were pale and drawn. Some cried quietly. Others sat in shock, staring at nothing. At the front of the room, a Vral representative stood on the stage. He was tall, over 2 meters, with scaled skin that shimmered green and gold under the lights. His eyes were large and dark, without pupils that humans could see. When he spoke, his voice came through a translation device that made the words sound flat and cold. He explained the program. The children would be taken to a facility called Kathros. They would be taught, trained, educated in the ways of galactic civilization. In 15 years, they would return home as ambassadors. They would help their species join the greater community. It was an honor, a gift. He did not say what would really happen. He did not explain how the children would be broken down and rebuilt, how they would forget their families, their languages, their homes, how they would return as strangers who served the Vral more than their own people. He did not mention the hundreds of other species who had gone through this same process, who now lived under Vral control, too afraid and too broken to resist. The Viral representative told the parents to be proud, to be patient, to trust the process. Then he left the stage. The auditorium emptied slowly. Parents shuffled out in silence, lost in their grief. But Hannah did not leave. She sat in her seat and watched the Viral guards near the exits. She studied their weapons, their armor, the way they moved. She memorized the symbols on their equipment. She listened to them talk to each other in their own language, recording the sounds on her phone. While other parents cried, Hannah gathered intelligence. Later that night, she broke into a government research facility. Her old military codes still worked. No one had bothered to deactivate them when she retired. She found the computers that held all the first contact data, information about Viral technology, maps of their known territories, communication logs, and buried deep in the classified files she found something else. Kethros was not a planet. It was a station, a massive fortress that moved through space, never staying in one place for long. It was designed to be impossible to find, impossible to track, impossible to attack. The Viral had built it specifically to hold their stolen children. And in 3,000 years of operation, no species had ever successfully rescued anyone from it. Hannah downloaded everything she could find. She copied files, recorded data, and saved images. When the security system detected her presence, she was already gone, disappearing into the soul night like a ghost. She returned to her apartment and spread the data across her desk. For hours she read and analyzed. The task seemed impossible. Kethros was too far away, too well defended, too secret. Earth had no ships that could reach it. Humanity had barely left their own solar system. They had no weapons that could challenge Viral technology, no allies who would help them, no leverage to negotiate with. Any reasonable person would have given up, would have accepted the situation, would have waited 15 years and hoped their child came back whole. But Hannah was not reasonable. She was a mother who had watched her son disappear into the sky. And somewhere in that darkness, in that impossible distance, Daijung was alone and afraid. He was waiting for her. He might not know it yet, but he was waiting. Hannah looked at the stolen data one more time. Then she opened her old military files and began making a list of names. People she had served with. People who owed her favors. People who were skilled enough, crazy enough, or desperate enough to help with an impossible mission. The Viral thought they were untouchable. They thought humanity would be like all the other species, shocked at first, then resigned, then compliant. They had studied human psychology. They had calculated human responses. They had planned for every possibility. But they had made one critical mistake. They had never encountered a human parent who refused to let go. They had never faced someone like Hannah, who would burn down the galaxy itself to bring her child home. As dawn broke over Seoul, Hannah sent the first message. Then the second. Then the third. She did not ask for help. She did not beg. She simply told the truth. Her son had been taken and she was going to get him back. Anyone who wanted to help was welcome. Anyone who tried to stop her would regret it. The Vril had started something they did not understand. They had taken the wrong child from the wrong parent on the wrong planet. And now, whether they knew it or not, they had declared war on a species that had never learned how to quit. The first person to respond was Taemin. His message came at 3 a.m, just 2 words, "I'm in." Hannah had not spoken to him in 5 years, not since his daughter was taken during a Vral collection sweep in Busan. Back then, Hannah had still been working for the military. She had tried to help him through official channels, but the government told them both to wait, to trust the process, to have faith. Taemin had not waited. He had quit his job at the National Observatory and disappeared into his grief. When Hannah found him, he was living in a basement workshop in Daejeon. The place smelled like burnt electronics and old coffee. Computer screens covered every wall, showing star charts and equations that made Hannah's head hurt. Taemin looked terrible, thin, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes. But his eyes were sharp and focused. He showed her what he had been building. A tracking system. It could detect viral energy signatures across impossible distances. The technology was mostly stolen. Pieces of alien hardware he had bought from black market dealers combined with human computers in ways that should not work, but somehow did. The system was unstable. It overheated after a few minutes of use, but it worked. He had already used it to track 3 virile ships. He knew their routes. He knew their patterns. Next came Jinho. He was harder to find. Officially, he had died 6 years ago during a classified operation in North Korea. His military record said he was killed in action. But Hana knew the truth. She had been part of the team that extracted him after the mission went wrong. She had carried him out of enemy territory with a bullet in his leg and 2 broken ribs. She had saved his life, and now she needed him to return the favor. She found him in Jeju Island, living under a false name in a fishing village. He looked older but still dangerous. When she explained what she needed, he did not hesitate. He did not ask about the risks or the odds of success. He just nodded and started packing his gear. Some debts could never be repaid, but they could be honored. Bora was only 19, but she was better with computers than anyone Hana had ever met. She had lost her younger brother to the Vral 2 weeks before Daejung was taken. Since then, she had hacked into 3 different government databases, studying everything she could find about alien technology. The authorities had noticed. There was a warrant out for her arrest. When Hana found her in a small apartment in Gwangju, Bora was already downloading the last files she needed before running. Hana offered her a choice: keep running and hiding, or use those skills for something that mattered. Bora looked at the photo of Daejung that Hana showed her. Then she looked at the picture of her brother that she kept on her desk. She started packing her computers. Hyunwoo was a combat medic who had served with Hana in the military. After he retired, he had gone to medical school and specialized in xenobiology, the study of alien life. When the virile arrived, he became obsessed with understanding them. He dissected every piece of Vrail technology he could get his hands on. He studied their biology from the limited samples available. He was looking for weaknesses, ways to hurt them if it ever became necessary. When Hana called, he was ready. Min Seok was a criminal. He smuggled goods across borders, traded in stolen technology, and asked no questions about where things came from or where they were going. But he also had something Hana desperately needed: a ship. Not a legal ship, not a registered ship, but a real spacecraft, cobbled together from salvaged alien parts and human engineering. It could fly. It could reach orbit. And with some modifications, it might be able to travel farther. He did not want to help at first. Too dangerous, he said. Too crazy. But Hana knew his weakness. She had information about his smuggling routes, data that could put him in prison for 20 years. She did not want to blackmail him, but she would if she had to. Min Seok understood. He agreed to help. But he made it clear, this was a one-time deal. After this, they were even. The last member of the team was Ji-won, a linguist and cultural anthropologist. She had been studying the Vrao language since first contact. She believed she could decode their navigational systems, predict their movement patterns. More importantly, she understood how they thought. She had spent weeks analyzing every virile communication, looking for patterns, for weaknesses, for anything that could give humanity an advantage. When the team finally gathered together in an abandoned warehouse outside Seoul, they were an unlikely group. A grieving mother, a broken scientist, a dead soldier, a teenage hacker, a combat medic, a criminal pilot, a linguist. None of them were heroes. None of them were perfect. But they were all desperate enough to try something impossible. Hana spread the data across a large table. Star charts, Vril ship routes, technical specifications, everything she had stolen from the government facility. The team studied it for hours, asking questions, pointing out problems, suggesting solutions. The challenge was enormous. Kethros moved constantly through uncharted space. The Vril deliberately kept its location secret. Even if they could find it, getting inside would be nearly impossible. But Taemin had an idea. The Vril ships left energy signatures, faint traces that dissipated quickly, but traces nonetheless. If they could intercept a supply ship, one of the vessels that brought resources to Kethros, they could follow it. The tracking system would burn out after a few hours, but a few hours might be enough. Ji-won added more information. She had noticed patterns in virile supply routes. The ships followed specific corridors through space, avoiding certain regions. By mapping these movements, she could predict where a supply ship might appear. It was not perfect, The odds were bad, but it was a chance. For 3 months, the team worked in secret. They stole equipment, they bribed contacts, they hacked databases. Bora broke into a military research center and copied the entire Vral communication archive. Taemin refined his tracking system, pushing it to its limits. Jinho acquired weapons, some human, some alien, all illegal. Hyunwoo stockpiled medical supplies and studied Vral physiology, looking for vulnerabilities. Min-suk worked on his ship, reinforcing the hull, upgrading the engines, installing stealth technology he had stolen from a government contractor. The authorities noticed eventually. Police came asking questions. Government agents started surveillance, but the team was always one step ahead. They moved locations constantly. They used encrypted communications. They left no traces. Hana knew they were running out of time. Eventually, someone would figure out what they were planning. Eventually, they would be stopped. Then Ji-won made a breakthrough. She found a pattern. Every 43 days, a Vral supply ship appeared near Jupiter's orbit. It stayed for exactly 17 minutes, then disappeared. The next window was in 5 days. If they missed it, they would have to wait another month and a half. By then, it would be too late. The team gathered one final time. Min-suk's ship was ready. Taemin's tracking system was calibrated. Bora had programmed a virus that could disrupt Vral sensors for 30 seconds. Not long, but maybe long enough. Jinho had weapons and tactical plans. Hyunwoo had medical supplies and contingency protocols. Ji-won had translation software and navigation data. Hana looked at each of them. These people had given up everything for a mission that would probably fail. They had risked their lives, their futures, their freedom, and they had done it for children they did not know, on a world they could not see against an enemy they could not beat. She wanted to say something meaningful, something inspiring, but the words stuck in her throat. So she just said thank you. It seemed inadequate. But it was all she had. They launched at midnight. Min-suk's ship lifted off from a remote field in Gangwon province. There were no clearances, no flight plans, no permissions. They just flew. The ship rattled and groaned, but it held together. Within minutes, they reached orbit. Within an hour, they were past the moon. Within a day, they were approaching Jupiter. The wait was agonizing. They floated in the darkness of space, watching their sensors, hoping the supply ship would appear. Hours passed. Then, exactly on schedule, there was a flash of light. A Vral vessel materialized 1,000 kilometers away. It was massive, 10 times larger than Min-suk's ship. Its hull was covered in symbols that glowed with strange colors. Bora activated her virus. For 30 seconds, the Viral ship's sensors would be blind. Min-suk fired the engines and moved the ship closer, tucking it against the Vral vessel's hull where the sensors could not detect them. It was dangerous. If they miscalculated by even a few meters, they would crash. But Min-suk's hands were steady. The ship slid into position perfectly. Taemin activated the tracking system. Immediately, screens filled with data, energy signatures, trajectory calculations, coordinates. The Viral ship was preparing to jump to faster than light speed. When it did, they would follow. The Viral ship vanished. Space twisted around them. Min-suk's ship lurched forward, pulled along in the wake of the much larger vessel. The tracking system screamed warnings. Heat levels climbed. The hull groaned under impossible stresses. But they held on, following that faint energy signature through the darkness. 4 hours later, they emerged in an uncharted region of space. The Vral supply ship was gone, but Taemin's system had recorded its destination. He fed the coordinates into the navigation computer. Min-suk turned the ship toward those coordinates. And then they saw it. Kethros. It was bigger than getting inside. Kethros was like trying to break into a fortress made of nightmares. The station had weapons that could destroy their ship from 1,000 kilometers away. It had sensors that could detect a single human heartbeat. It had shields that could stop anything humans had ever built. But it also had one weakness that the Vral had never considered. They were so confident in their defenses that they never expected anyone to be crazy enough to try. Min-suk piloted the ship through the debris field slowly, carefully, using the wreckage as cover. Every piece of floating metal was a gravestone for some other species that had tried and failed. The team saw ships from civilizations they had never heard of. Some were ancient, corroded by centuries in space. Others looked new. The Vral had been doing this for a very long time. Hyun-woo had studied the station's layout from stolen blueprints. He found what they needed, a waste disposal system that opened every 6 hours to dump refuse into space. For 90 seconds there would be an opening. No shields, no sensors, just a hole in Kethros's armor. The problem was the radiation. The waste was toxic, deadly to most life forms, but their suits could handle it. Probably. They waited for the disposal cycle. Time crawled. Every minute felt like an hour. Finally, sensors detected the opening. Min-seok launched a small pod with Hana and Jin-ho inside. The pod was little more than a metal box with thrusters. It shot toward the opening at dangerous speed. The radiation hit them immediately. Their suits screamed warnings. Temperature gauges climbed into the red. But they were already through, tumbling into a maintenance corridor deep inside Kethros. The pod crashed against a wall. Hana and Jin-ho stumbled out, their suits damaged but functional. Behind them, the disposal port closed. They were inside. There was no way back now. The corridor was dark and cold. Emergency lights cast strange shadows on the walls. The air smelled wrong, metallic and sharp. Jin-ho checked his scanner. No guards nearby. No immediate threats. They moved forward quietly, every sense alert. One wrong sound, one wrong turn, and they would be discovered. Bora guided them from the ship, her voice crackling in their earpieces. She had hacked into Kethros's outer systems. Not deep enough to trigger alarms, but enough to see basic layouts. Left at the next junction. Up 3 levels. Avoid the main corridors. Stay in the maintenance areas where the guards rarely patrolled. As they moved deeper into the station, they started seeing signs of what Kethros really was. Cells, hundreds of them, thousands. Each one held a child from some distant world. Through the transparent walls, Hana saw them. Small figures sitting alone in white rooms. Some stared at nothing. Some cried silently. Some just slept. They looked broken already, and they had only been here weeks or months. Hana wanted to stop and free them all right there. But Jin-ho pulled her forward. They had to find Dae-jung first. They had to complete the mission. Emotion was the enemy now. Emotion would get them killed. They reached a larger chamber and froze. Below them, visible through a viewing window, was a ceremony. A group of teenage aliens, species Hana did not recognize, stood in rows. They wore virile uniforms. They chanted words in the virile language. At the front of the room, a Vril commander placed badges on their chests. These were the success stories. Children who had been broken and remade. Children who now served their captors willingly. Hana felt sick. This was what would happen to Dae-jung if they failed. He would forget her, forget Earth, forget who he was. He would become a weapon pointed at his own people. Bora's voice came through the earpiece again. She had found Dae-jung's location. Sector 7, Level 12. The isolation wing. He was still in the first stage of conditioning. They had to move fast. They climbed through service shafts and crawled through ventilation ducts. Jin-ho moved like a ghost, completely silent. He had done this kind of work before, in places just as dangerous. Every few minutes they heard guards passing nearby. Vril voices speaking in their harsh language. The sound of weapons. The hum of technology, but they stayed hidden. Level 12 was worse than the others. The isolation wing was completely silent. No sounds at all. Not even the hum of machinery. Just perfect, terrible silence. The cells here were smaller, darker. Sensory deprivation chambers designed to break a child's connection to reality. The Vril believed that emptiness was the first step to rebuilding someone new. They moved from cell to cell, looking through the one-way glass. Each child they saw was another knife in Hana's heart. So many species, so many worlds, all suffering the same fate. But she forced herself to keep looking, to keep searching. Then she found him. Cell 247. Dae-jung sat in the corner, thin and pale. His blue jacket was gone. He wore a plain gray uniform. His hair was longer, messy, but it was him. He was alive! Hana's hand pressed against the glass. She wanted to scream his name, but she forced herself to stay quiet. Jin-ho was already working on the lock, his tools interfacing with the alien technology. Then alarms started blaring. Not because of them. Bora confirmed that immediately. Something else had happened. Another ship had tried to breach Kethros's perimeter. It had been destroyed instantly, but the attack had put the station on high alert. Blast doors were closing. Guard patrols were doubling. Their time was running out. Jin-ho worked faster. The lock clicked open. The cell door slid aside. Hana rushed inside. Daejung looked up, confused and frightened. He did not recognize her. 3 months of isolation had damaged his memory, clouded his mind. He scrambled backward, trying to get away. Hana knelt down slowly. She removed her helmet. She spoke softly in Korean, saying his name. She reminded him of home. Your favorite food is kimchi fried rice. Your stuffed bear is named Bori. I sing you the star song every night before sleep. Remember, Daejung. Remember me? Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, memory, understanding. His lips formed a word. Mom? Then he was in her arms, crying, shaking, holding on like he would never let go. Hana held him back, tears streaming down her face. But there was no time for reunion. Guards were coming. As they moved back into the corridor, a voice called out from another cell. Not Korean. Not any language Hana knew. But Jiwon, listening from the ship, translated immediately. It was a teenage alien. He had been watching through his cell wall. He said he could help. He knew things about Kethros that the Vral did not realize he knew. His name was Resh. He had been here 8 years. 8 years of watching, listening, learning. He knew the station's systems. He knew the guard patterns. He knew the weak points. And he knew something crucial. The central control hub that monitored all the cells was in this sector. If they could disable it, every cell in the isolation wing would unlock at once. Hana made a decision in seconds. They would free Resh. He would guide them to the control hub, and they would unlock every cell. This mission had started with one child, but it would not end that way. They were going to free them all. Jinho opened Resh's cell. The alien boy was tall and thin, with blue skin and large eyes. He moved stiffly, unused to walking after years in a small cell, but his mind was sharp. He pointed down the corridor and started giving directions. Bora confirmed the route from her hacked systems. It matched. Resh knew what he was talking about. They moved as a group now. Hana carried Daejung. Jinho led the way with his weapon ready. Resh navigated, his memory perfect despite years of isolation. They reached the control hub, a small room filled with screens and controls. 2 Vril technicians sat inside monitoring the cells. They never saw Jinho coming. He took them down silently, efficiently. Bora talked Resh through the systems. Her voice was calm and clear. Press that button. Enter this code. Route the power through the secondary system. Resh's hands moved across the controls. He was smart, adapting quickly to Bora's instructions. Screens flashed. Warnings appeared. And then all at once, every cell door in the isolation wing opened. The response was not chaos. It was coordinated. Hundreds of children emerged from their cells, moving with purpose. Resh explained as they ran. The children had been communicating. Not with words, the Viral monitored all sounds, but with taps on walls, with patterns of movement, with codes developed over decades. They had been planning this moment for years. They were ready. Some children ran for the armory. Some sabotaged power systems. Some blocked corridors to slow the Viral guards. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. These children who had been taken and broken and used were fighting back. The Vral had taught them to obey, but they remembered how to resist. Hana contacted the ship. The mission had changed. They were not extracting one child anymore. They were extracting everyone. Minsuk cursed but confirmed. He was moving the ship to an emergency port on the lower levels. Taemin and Hyunwoo were preparing to create a diversion, something big enough to pull security forces away from the escape routes. As they ran through the corridors, leading freed children toward the evacuation point, Hana realized something important. The Vril had made a terrible mistake. They thought fear and isolation could break anyone. They thought children were weak and easy to control. They had done this for 3,000 years across 1,000 worlds. But they had never faced humans before. They had never understood what happens when you take someone's child. They had never learned that some species do not forgive. Some species. The children moved through Kethros like a storm. For 3,000 years, the Vral had taken them from hundreds of worlds, broken their spirits and turned them into tools. But the Viral had made a fundamental error. They had underestimated what children could do when they finally fought back. They had forgotten that suffering creates strength and oppression breeds resistance. Hana led a group of younger children toward the evacuation point. Daejung still held tight in her arms. He would not let go. Behind her, Resh coordinated with other older prisoners through a communication system they had developed over years of captivity. They used hand signals, tapped codes on the walls, and moved with precision that spoke of long planning. Jin-Ho protected the rear, his weapon ready. Vral guards appeared at intersections, but they were confused and disorganized. The station had never been breached before. They did not know how to respond. Their training was for external threats, not internal rebellion. Jin-Ho took advantage of their confusion, directing the children down paths that avoided the heaviest resistance. But as they reached the lower levels, Hana saw a problem. The evacuation port where Min-seok waited could only hold maybe 50 people. There were over 200 children freed from the isolation wing alone, with more coming from other sections. The ship was too small. Even if they packed everyone in like cargo, they could not fit. Hana contacted Taimin on the ship. They needed more time, more ships, more help. Taimin's response was grim but unsurprising. Earth had been tracking their mission. The moment Kethros's alarms went off, human governments knew something was happening, and they had made a decision. A fleet was coming. Civilian ships, cargo vessels, anything that could carry people, but they were still hours away. Hours they did not have. Viral reinforcements were mobilizing. The station's defenses were coming online. If they stayed much longer, they would all be trapped. But if they left now, hundreds of children would be abandoned. Hana looked at Dae-jung, then at Resh, then at all the other children who had just tasted freedom for the first time in years. There was no choice. They would hold Kethros until help arrived. No matter the cost, she gathered the older children, the ones who had been here longest. She explained the situation clearly and honestly. They could not all leave yet. They had to defend the evacuation point until more ships arrived. It was dangerous. Some of them might die. Anyone who wanted to could stay with the younger children and wait. No one would judge them. Not one child stayed behind. They had weapons now stolen from armories. They had knowledge of the station. And they had years of anger that needed an outlet. Resh organized them into groups. Some would hold choke points. Some would sabotage systems. Some would create diversions. They moved with purpose, these children from a dozen different worlds, united by shared suffering and a desperate hope for freedom. Hana found a command center near the evacuation port. It had screens showing different parts of the station. She watched as the battle unfolded. In Sector 4, a group of teenage aliens held a corridor against virile guards. In Sector 9, children sabotaged a power distribution hub, plunging entire sections into darkness. In Sector 12, someone had released all the training robots and reprogrammed them to attack virile soldiers. It was chaos. Beautiful, terrible chaos. The virile were losing control of their own station. Their perfect system was falling apart, and it was happening because they had never understood the most important thing about children. They learn. They adapt. They remember. And when you hurt them, they learn how to hurt back. Then Hana saw something on the screens that made her blood run cold. A Vral commander had appeared on an observation deck with a squad of elite guards. They were setting up weapons pointed at the evacuation port. If those weapons fired, everyone waiting there would die. Min-seok's ship would be destroyed. The mission would end in massacre. Jin-Ho saw it too. He was already moving, gathering a strike team. But Hana stopped him. She had a different idea. A crazy idea. But crazy had gotten them this far. She contacted Bora on the ship and asked a question. Could she broadcast a message across the entire station? Bora said yes. Hana told her to get ready. Hana made her way to the observation deck, moving through corridors that were still clear. She walked openly, not hiding anymore. Let the Vral see her. Let them know that a human had invaded their fortress. She arrived at the observation deck and stood in the doorway. The virile commander turned to face her. He was tall even for his species. His scales were darker than others she had seen. His eyes were cold. He spoke through a translator device. He told her that her resistance was meaningless. Even if she escaped with some children, the Vral would find Earth. They would make humanity an example. They would take more children. They would break humanity's spirit just like they had broken so many others. It was inevitable. It had always been inevitable. Hana listened to his speech. Then she smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret. She spoke clearly, knowing Bora was recording everything. You should have studied us more carefully. You learned our language. You scanned our biology. You calculated our responses. But you never understood what humans do when someone takes our children. She explained what the Vril did not know. For 3 months, while they thought Earth was mourning, humanity had been working. Taemin's tracking technology had been copied and distributed across every human station. Earth now knew where every Vril ship was located. They had mapped every Vril facility. They had gathered data from every species the Viral had ever oppressed. And they had done something the Vril never expected. They had shared it. All of it, with everyone. Every oppressed species in the galaxy now had access to complete information about Viral locations, Viral technology, Viral weaknesses. 3,000 years of carefully guarded secrets exposed in a single day. The Vril Empire had been built on fear and ignorance. Humanity had just stripped both away. The commander's translator device went silent. His guards looked at each other, uncertain. Then reports started coming in. Vril stations across the galaxy were under attack. Species that had been subjugated for centuries were rising up. Ships were being destroyed. Facilities were being overrun. The Empire was not falling. It was being torn apart from 1,000 directions at once. Hana delivered the final message. Earth had given the Viral 1 hour to release all the children on Kethros. If they refused, the attacks would intensify. Every species in the galaxy would know where to find Vril worlds. Every resistance movement would have the tools they needed. The Vril could try to hunt down humanity, but by the time they found Earth, their empire would be ashes. The commander stood frozen. He had spent decades enforcing Viral dominance. He had overseen the breaking of thousands of children. He had believed absolutely in the Empire's invincibility, and now, in a single moment, he understood that it was over. Not because humanity was stronger, but because humanity had done something the Viral never expected. They had unified the victims. They had turned fear into anger. They had made resistance possible. The Viral guards lowered their weapons. The commander gave orders to stand down. Across Kethros, other Viral soldiers received similar commands. The Empire was recalling its forces to defend core territories. Kethros was being abandoned. The children had won, not because they were stronger, but because someone had finally given them a chance to fight back. Minseok's ship moved to the evacuation port. But it was not alone anymore. Human ships were arriving, dozens of them. Civilian transports and cargo vessels all responding to the call. Volunteers from Earth had dropped everything to help rescue alien children they had never met. The ships docked with Kethros one by one. Children filed aboard, escorted by human crews who treated them gently, who spoke softly, who promised they were safe now. Hana supervised the evacuation, checking each group, making sure no one was left behind. Daejung stayed beside her, helping younger children, speaking words of comfort in languages he did not know but somehow made understood. Resh worked with the human crews, identifying children who needed medical attention, translating for species whose languages the computers did not recognize. Hours passed. The evacuation continued, and slowly Kethros, the fortress that had stood for 3,000 years as a symbol of Vril power, emptied out. The children were going home, or at least they were going somewhere safer, somewhere they could heal, somewhere they could remember who they were before the Vril tried to break them. As the last child boarded the last ship, Hana stood on the observation deck and looked at the station. It was dark now, empty, abandoned. The Viral had fled. The children were free, and somewhere in the galaxy, on hundreds of worlds, other species were fighting back against their oppressors. All because one mother had refused to accept that her child was gone. She turned away from the window and walked back to Minseok's ship. Her team was waiting. They looked exhausted but alive. Taemin had burns on his hands from overheating equipment. Bora's eyes were red from staring at screens for hours. Hyunwoo was treating injuries on a dozen different species. Jinho cleaned his weapons with steady hands. Jiwon was already working on translation protocols to help the children communicate. And Minseok was preparing the ship for the long journey home. They had done the impossible. They had challenged an empire. They had freed Hun. The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks. The fleet of civilian ships moved slowly through space, carrying hundreds of children from dozens of different species. Most of the vessels had never been designed for long-distance travel. Engines broke down. Life support systems struggled. But the crews worked day and night, making repairs with whatever materials they had. keeping everyone alive through determination and creativity. On Min Seok's ship, Hana spent every moment with Daejung. He was not the same child she had lost 3 months ago. He woke up screaming from nightmares. He flinched when people moved too quickly. He forgot simple things: his address, his friends' names, what his room looked like. The isolation had damaged his memory, left holes in his mind that might never fully heal. But slowly, with patience and love, pieces of his old self returned. He remembered his favorite food. He remembered his stuffed bear. He remembered the song Hana sang to him every night. The memories came back in fragments, disjointed and unclear. But they came back, and with each memory, Daejung seemed a little more present, a little more like himself. The other children faced different challenges. Resh, who had spent 8 years on Kethros, could not remember his homeworld at all. He had been taken at age 6. Now he was functionally an adult, but he had no memories of childhood beyond the white walls of his cell. Jiwon worked with him for hours each day, showing him images of his species, teaching him their language again, trying to rebuild what the Viral had stolen. Some children cried constantly. Some withdrew into silence. Some became angry and lashed out at anyone who tried to help. Hyunwoo moved between the ships, treating injuries both physical and mental. He had limited supplies and no experience with most of these species' biology. But he did his best, adapting human medicine, improvising treatments, keeping everyone alive through sheer determination. News from the galaxy was chaotic. The information Earth had broadcast was causing revolutions across hundreds of worlds. Species that had been under Viral control for centuries were fighting back. Some attacks succeeded, some failed. But the cumulative effect was devastating to the Empire. The Viral military, spread too thin across too many fronts, was collapsing. Stations were being abandoned. Ships were being recalled. The 3,000-year reign was ending. But the galaxy was not celebrating. The Viral had maintained a brutal order. Now there was chaos. Old territorial disputes were reigniting. Species with ancient grudges were settling scores. Power vacuums were being filled by whoever was strongest or most ruthless. The galaxy was free from the Viral, but freedom came with its own problems. Earth found itself in an unexpected position. The role they had played in exposing the Viral gave them credibility. Other species wanted to know who these humans were, these newcomers who had done what no one else dared. Some were grateful. Others were suspicious. A few were openly hostile, blaming humanity for the chaos. But most were just curious. What kind of species would risk everything to save children they did not even know? When the fleet finally reached Earth orbit, they were met by an armada of ships, military vessels ready to defend against any viral retaliation, medical ships equipped to treat alien species, diplomatic vessels from a dozen different worlds, all wanting to meet with human leaders, and thousands of civilian ships filled with people who just wanted to help. The children were taken to a facility that had been built in just 3 weeks. It was not a prison or a hospital. It was designed to be a home, a place where they could heal and learn and eventually decide their own futures. The best doctors, therapists, teachers, and caregivers that humanity could find were waiting. They had studied everything they could about the different species. They had prepared rooms and food and programs for each child's needs. Some children could be returned to their homeworlds. Their families were waiting. Their cultures remembered them. But others had no homes to return to. Their species were extinct. Their planets were destroyed. Their families were dead. For them, Earth became home. Resh was one of those. He chose to stay along with dozens of others. They formed a unique community, survivors who had more in common with each other than with the species they were born into. Daejung began attending therapy sessions. A doctor who specialized in trauma worked with him 3 times a week. It was slow progress. Some days he seemed better. Some days he regressed. But gradually the nightmares became less frequent. The flinching stopped. The memories solidified. He started attending a normal school. He made friends. He laughed again. Not the carefree laughter of the child he had been, but something deeper and more knowing. One evening, 6 months after the rescue, Daejung asked Hana a question that had been bothering him. Was it worth it? All the violence and chaos. All the species now fighting each other because the Viral were gone. All the disruption to the galaxy. Was bringing him home worth all that cost? Hana thought about her answer carefully. She did not lie to him. She told him the truth. The galaxy was more dangerous now. Species that had been oppressed for centuries were taking revenge. Some were behaving just as badly as the Viral had. Good people were dying in conflicts that might not have happened if the Empire still stood. The cost had been high, higher than she had imagined when she started, but she also told him this. She did not do it because the cost was acceptable. She did it because he was worth it. Every child was worth it. The Vril had built their empire on the belief that some lives mattered less than order, that children could be sacrificed for stability. That fear was more important than freedom. Humanity rejected that belief. Maybe the galaxy would be chaotic for a while. Maybe things would be harder. But at least every species now had a choice. At least children would not disappear into the darkness anymore. Dae-jung was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. He understood. Not completely, he was still just 8 years old. But he understood enough. Sometimes the right thing is not the easy thing. Sometimes you have to break something broken to build something better. The team that had rescued him had all moved on to new lives. Taemin continued working on tracking technology, but now he focused on helping lost ships find their way home. His daughter, one of the children rescued from Kethros, worked with him. Their relationship was complicated. She remembered little from before her capture, and he struggled with guilt over failing to protect her. But they were healing together, building something new from the wreckage of what was lost. Jinho returned to his quiet life on Jeju Island, but he kept in contact with the team. He trained young people in survival and infiltration skills, preparing humanity for whatever threats might come next. He believed the Viral would not be the last empire humanity faced. The galaxy was full of dangers. Better to be ready. Bora became Earth's leading expert on alien computer systems. She worked with the Rehabilitation Center, teaching rescued children how to use technology as a tool for freedom rather than control. Her brother, who had survived Kethros, became her apprentice. They built programs together, created systems together, and slowly rebuilt the relationship that 3 months of separation had damaged. Hyunwoo opened a medical clinic that specialized in treating alien species and trauma survivors. He saw patients from dozens of worlds, treating injuries both physical and psychological. He even treated some Vril who had defected after the Empire fell, because, as he explained to anyone who questioned it, everyone deserved a chance to heal, even former enemies. Maybe especially former enemies. Minseok gave up smuggling. His ship, patched together from human and alien technology, became a symbol of cooperation. He joined Earth's diplomatic fleet, piloting missions to distant worlds. He was good at his job. He understood how to navigate dangerous situations. He knew when to be cautious and when to take risks. The skills he had learned as a criminal served him well as a diplomat. Ji-won led Earth's cultural exchange program. She helped species recover their histories after generations of Vril suppression. She documented languages that were nearly extinct. She preserved stories that had almost been forgotten. She wrote extensively about the importance of memory and the danger of forgetting who you are. Her work became required reading across dozens of worlds. 5 years after the fall of Kethros, Hana stood in the courtyard of the Rehabilitation Center. It was a warm day. Children from a dozen species played together, inventing games that mixed elements of their different cultures. They laughed and argued and competed just like children everywhere. They were building something new, a generation that knew what the galaxy had been and refused to let it return to that darkness. Dae-jung, now 12 years old, walked up to her. He had been working with Resh on a project. They were building a memorial database, a record of every child the Viral had ever taken over 3,000 years. Names, faces, stories. A way to remember those who did not survive. A way to honor those who did. A promise that this would never happen again. As they stood together watching the children play, Hana received a message on her communicator. It was from Earth's Interspecies Council. Another species had sent a distress signal. Their children had been taken by a different empire, one that had learned from the Viril's mistakes. This new enemy operated in deeper secrecy. They were harder to track, harder to find, harder.